So if you look at the chart on the left hand side, which is the Strait of Hormuz west to east vessel crossing, which basically means how shipping is proceeding from that area to the rest of the world and primarily Asia. So as you can see, this chart denotes the number of ships every day which cross Strait of Hormuz, and that this data dates back to April 25. So if you can see, typically on a day there are 30 to 40 crossings of ships every day. And if you see post 28th of Feb, when the bombing started, that has collapsed to below 5. So typically from 40 ships, now the crossing of the ships is just between 2 to 3. So that's the kind of impact that's happened on global oil supply, global various petrochemical supply, and other oil derivatives. And if you look at the impact what it has had on crude, this chart is very instructive. So the blue line on the right hand side chart, it shows the spot oil price. The red line shows the second month oil future. The gray line shows the third month, and the green line shows the 6th month. So if you can see this chart, uh, interestingly, the spot price gap in the beginning of the conflict compared to the future prices was quite narrow. So typically, if you look at the front end, it was around 75 to 80. And if you look at the future prices, that was around 70 to 75. But if you look at the dispersion today, the oil prices reached a high of almost $120, which by end of March. But if you look at the future prices, that widened from one to $80. So there's a gap from just $5 per barrel between spot and future. That gap opened to $14. And what does that mean? That means, which we were discussing in the earlier slide, that the rest of the world believes that probably next couple of months this conflict will subside, and hence they are ready to supply that oil 6 months hence at just $80 a barrel. But it's the spot price which, because of the shipping restrictions, which is getting dislocated, and it's because of those supply conditions, we are seeing very high spot prices. In fact, it's very close to what we saw during the Russia-Ukraine crisis. So on one hand, you have the spot prices which are very high. On the other hand, if you see, as the conflict goes on, so if you look at the third month, that's about $96, and 6 months 85, 80 to 85. Broadly, that people do expect the supply normalization. So what is important is to track how long this conflict lasts, and very important to see how this shipping, the ships crossing, which is happening right now, to really pick up, because that will be a key indicator to see normalizations. Don't just look at commentary, also look at actual ship crossings between this Strait of Hormuz. That will really determine how this oil prices unfold in the near term. And how does it affect the rest of the world? So we'll come to India, but we'll first start with how it affects really the rest of the world. So if you look at this, chart on the left-hand side, which shows the global growth outlook pre, the Iran-US conflict, overall global growth was expected to be above 3%. So in Q1 calendar year 2026, it was expected to be 3.4, then 3.2, and then flatlining at 3.1%. But if you look at now, what's the outlook? Of course, because the conflict started by end of Feb, it will not have a material impact on Q1 26. So there's only a 10 basis downgrade. But as you go along ahead, we are already seeing 20 basis downgrade in the Q2 of 2026, and a 30 basis downgrade in rest of the year. So that's a major impact, because not only this is a price hike, there is also a production disruption which is happening. So if you look at the key derivatives from these, crude oil, whether it's diesel, jet fuel, helium, urea, etc., they will have huge cascading effect on food and other non-energy goods. So, for example, 30% of global commercial helium depends on Hormuz transit. So basically, helium is a derivative of LNG. Since Qatar is one of the largest producers of LNG, that's also one of the primary suppliers of helium. And helium is a very important raw material for semiconductors. It's a very important, raw material for health equipment like MRI scanners. For most of the electronics, also helium is a key raw material. So this is not just about the price impact. This is also about the supply. Because the supply is disrupted right now, it's very difficult to keep on production lines going for these key industries, and that's why we are seeing a lot of distress, not only in terms of price, but in production and growth outlook for these, for countries which are engaged in production of these, components. So, like countries like South Korea, Taiwan, etc., which are the leaders of these industries, they are facing huge raw material shortages. So far, they are running down their inventory. But if this conflict does not subside in the next 15, 20 days, we may see slightly difficult days going ahead. If you look at sulfur supply, 50% of global sulfur exports rely on Hormuz transit. And sulfur is a big component for producing sulfuric acid, which then is used for producing fertilizer, various chemicals. Sulfur is also a key component of metals processing. So it's a very interconnected supply chain, so that not only it's all about oil, it's about various industries which will get affected if the Strait of Hormuz does not get opened up. So if you look at the impact of this escalation on various inflation outlook, and if you look at March 2026 inflation nowcast as presented by Bloomberg, it could result in an impact of 40 to 50 basis points across developed markets. Of course, developed markets have much more inventory of these raw materials. They have slightly, domestic sources as well, and they have the wherewithal to absorb these price hikes relatively better. So this is the impact that you are seeing in a developed market. Imagine the impact on the emerging economy. So the impact on emerging economies, which probably don't have too many substitutes, where either the producers or whether from the fiscal side, the government cannot absorb this kind of cost. The impact on small and medium enterprises and export-oriented industries in these emerging economies, the impact both on growth and inflation could be much more significant.
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.